Mr. Roger Updegrove.
Here.
Mr. Zawada.
Here.
Mr. Brophy.
Here.
Ms. Deroff.
Present.
Mrs. Kratz.
Here.
Ms. Nyman.
Here.
Mrs. Scott.
Here.
Mr. Brad Updegrove.
Here.
Mr. Panarello.
Here.
All present.
Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. Think about September 11th. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. The Board of School Directors held an executive session after the August 27, 2024 meeting. The topic was informational. The session lasted approximately 45 minutes. The Board of School Directors held an executive session on September 3rd, 2024. Meeting was personal. This session lasted approximately 50 minutes. And the Board of School Directors held an executive session on September 9th, 2024. The meeting was personnel. This session lasted approximately 210 minutes. Board also held an executive session today, September 10th. Topic was personnel, and it lasted approximately 30 minutes.
At this time, we would like to have a presentation on our federal programs update. I'd like to invite Mrs. Landis up, and she is going to give us an overview of our multiple federal programs that we receive on an annual basis. So the floor is yours, Mrs. Landis.
Good evening. I promise not to take too much of your time, but this is the time of year where our applications are due for federal programs for the upcoming school year. So just wanted to highlight a few things and make sure that you are aware of our federal programs and what that funding is used for, because we do get around $1 million every year through these funds. There are 3 title programs that we participate in. Is that on? Through federal programs, Title I, Title II, and Title IV. So Title I is a 100% federally funded program that provides financial assistance for educational opportunities, and the criteria for that is really based on our free and reduced lunch numbers to determine which schools are served and how much money we receive for Title I services. Title II is also a 100% federally funded supplemental program, and that provides assistance to improve skills of teachers and quality of instruction. It can be used for professional learning. It can also be used for class size reduction. And then Title IV is the other one that we participate in, and that's really 3 different categories that pot of money is divided into that we have to spend, and it's providing all students with access to a well-rounded education, improving conditions for student learning, and improving the use of technology and digital literacy. So I'll talk a little bit more in just a moment about how we have used some of those funds in our district. Title I is the biggest pot of money of those 3. And we have 5 of our 9 buildings that receive Title I funding. So 4 of our elementary schools, Boyertown, Colbrookdale, Earl, and Washington, are identified as Title I. And then Middle School West is also a Title I school. The slide that you see here comes right from our Title I website, and I have the website linked at the bottom there for you. This website is provided for our parents to receive information. We have monthly newsletters that we include on there, as well as our parent school compacts and things of that nature that we're required to have as part of our federal regulations. So Boyertown has traditionally been what's called a targeted assistance Title I program in the past up until the 23-24 school year. Targeted assistance was where, basically our intervention programs in those buildings were what was funded through Title I, and our goals were directly related to that. If you have a certain percentage of your student population that qualifies for free and reduced lunch, you can move up to what's called the school-wide level Title I program, and in that case, you're entitled entire school building, all of the students in that building are considered Title I students, and all of the teachers in that school are considered Title I teachers. And your programming is more throughout the whole building, not just a specific remediation program. And so in 23-24, right before I started in this role, actually, my predecessor, Dr. O'Barrow, had started the application process for our district to be approved to move to that school-wide Title I program instead of targeted assistance. So last year was our first year as school-wide for those 5 buildings. They had teams that included parents and community members and staff in the schools that created those school-wide plans and the goals that went along with those. And we had to report quarterly on our progress on those goals. And now we are moving into our second year of being school-wide in those 5 buildings. Typically, you need to have 40% or more of your student population qualify for free and reduced lunch in order to be able to participate in a school-wide program. We had a couple of our buildings that had hit that level back when Dr. O'Barrow had submitted this application. And even though not all of the buildings met that criteria, we were granted approval to move to that school-wide. So what I'm showing you here is for our 24-25 consolidated application, based on the data from last year that we look at with our free and reduced lunch numbers, you can see the 5 schools above the line there are the ones that are our Title I buildings, and behind the school is the percent of free and reduced lunch students from those particular buildings. The challenge that I ran into this year, if you see there in red where I have the percentage by district, across our district as a whole, 33 and 6900% of our students qualify for free and reduced lunch. Earl was at 33 and 5800%. So by 0.11%, they were under that district average, which meant technically they didn't qualify for Title I services this year. But because they've received them in the past and have participated, I was able to apply to the state for a waiver for Earl to be continued to be served with our Title I funds. So those 5 buildings at the top continue to receive our Title I funding, and then the ones under that district average are not currently served with funds from Title I programs. I know this is a little bit small, but this chart just kind of shows you some of the differences between targeted assistance and school-wide. And again, school-wide is what we have shifted to for the past 2 years based on that increasing percentage of qualifying students. And again, all students now in those 5 buildings are Title I students. All staff in those buildings are Title I staff. We have to report every year. It's called a right to know letter that parents have an ability to find out, the qualifications of their child's teacher. And if we have any teachers who are not highly qualified by having current certifications, we have to notify any families in that classroom regarding that. We do have to set aside parent involvement funds, and that was part of targeted assistance as well as school-wide. But now that we're school-wide, we have to invite all of the families in those 5 schools when we have family nights. For example, we did a literacy game night back in the spring, and we invited all of the families from those 5 schools to come out and participate. And we provided snacks. The reading specialist led some games. We gave take-home activities to the families that they could take home to practice over the summer and work on their skills. It just expands our reach with what we're able to do. This year, for 24-25, our total allocation for Title I is $769,919. That is actually a decrease of a little over $48,000 from last year. That's not due to anything we did or didn't do as a district. Basically, every district across the state had their Title I funding cut this year, so we were not alone in that. Another thing for you to be aware of is we have to provide services to qualifying non-public schools as well. So every spring we send out a letter to any non-public schools where we believe we have Boyertown students residing. Title I money follows the student. And if we have students that qualify, with that free and reduced lunch qualifying umbrella, and they live in the boundary area of one of our Title I buildings and are in the grades that we serve, then we have to provide services for them as well. For this year, there are 6 different private schools that are actually fall across 4 different intermediate units. So I had to have contracts with the Berks County IU, the Montgomery County IU, the Chester County IU, and the Carbon-Lehigh IU this year in order to serve students in those non-public schools where we have qualifying students. The majority of that $769,000 that you see there is used for a portion of the salaries and benefits for our reading specialists in those buildings and our instructional paraprofessionals that serve our students' academic needs. And then we also, again, have to set aside some funds for family engagement as well as homelessness. So I work with Dr. Horton, who's here this evening, to make sure that we are utilizing those funds appropriately to support the needs of any of our homeless students. Title II is the one that we have used for class size reduction. Last year, we were able to offset the salary and benefits of 1.5 teachers in our district. This year, we did see a decrease of about $15,000 in Title II funding as well. Our total allocation this year is just over $133,000. We also have to provide equitable service to non-public schools there as well, but that money stays within Berks County. And so there are 3 schools this year in Berks County, non-public schools, that we have to give a chunk of our Title II funds to. It had been 5 schools previously, but 2 of the non-public schools that we served last year closed their doors at the end of 23-24, and so the number of schools we serve has gone down a little bit. But that is Title II. Title III, you might be thinking, well, she said 1, 2, and 4. What about 3? Title III is a program that's for language instruction for limited English proficient and immigrant students. Based on the amount of funding that we would receive based on our district's data, in the past that has not proven to be a worthwhile use of our resources in order to meet the necessary mandates for participation. So we have not taken Title III funds historically. It's something we look at every year, and we're in communication with the BCIU with to determine, whether that's something to consider in the future. Our English language teacher, Mrs. Baumgard, is still able to participate in programs with the BCIU and participate in meetings with other ELL teachers across the county. So she can still do that. We just do not participate in Title III funding at the present time. And then Title IV is the one bit of good news here. We did see an increase in Title IV, though it is our smallest allocation. We have $61,611 for this year. And you may recall at the beginning slide I shared with you, there were kind of 3 different areas that we have to attribute those funds to. And so, again, we have to provide equitable services to non-public schools with that money as well. But in terms of what we use here in the district, we have used it to pay for additional SAP services at the high school so that we can have a student assistance program liaison there 5 days a week instead of 4. So we've paid for that extra need through this money. We've been able to pay for first aid and CPR training as some wellness use of funds as well. There's a resource called Discovery Education that's online resources for teachers that ties to things in their curriculum, and we pay for that for, I believe there's 7 of our 9 buildings that currently use Discovery Ed, so we pay that license through there. We've been able to use funds to pay for additional science and literacy training for our teachers as we've worked to keep up with those state mandates. And then the one where we've seen, I think, the biggest increase in cost is for students who receive free and reduced lunch. We use Title IV funding if they're taking AP courses and wish to take the AP exam, or they're in a dual enrollment course and there's a tuition fee associated with that. We have offset those expenses for students who receive free and reduced lunch through Title IV. And we've seen I believe a pretty significant chunk of our funds go to that over the past few years as costs rise, as well as thankfully more students are participating in those opportunities, which is a positive thing. Any amount that doesn't fit into Title IV then kind of spills over into our OTL budget to make sure that we're providing for those needs for students. The last thing that I have for you is just sharing with you. You've heard me mention the non-public piece of this, and I thought you might just want to know how much of the grant do we have to, share with the IUs for those non-public schools. So you can see the BCIU, there's 3 numbers listed there because we do have Title I, 2, and 4 non-public allocations through Berks County Intermediate Unit, so those amounts are there. And then Carbon-Lehigh, Chester, County and Montgomery County are less, and it's based on a per pupil amount that's calculated for how many students we have and they have in their schools. So that is federal programs in a nutshell.
Mrs. Landis, you made the point about a couple of those schools closing. Do they
Yes.
then redistribute the funds equally with the same pot of funds,
Yes,
or
both.
do they do it with a lesser amount based upon the actual number of schools?
Both of the schools that closed were Berks County schools. And so I worked with the intermediate unit and we determined how much their allocation was, and then that gets redistributed. So then I had to go back to some of the other non-public schools and say, hey, you have a little bit of extra money you weren't anticipating. What else, is there a little bit more that you would like to spend on the programs that you were working on so that we can use up those funds? If we don't use them all, we can carry over some money to the following year. We prefer not to do that. I know Mrs. Denicola prefers when we don't have to do that. But in some cases, we do have to have some carryover, and then we just have to spend those funds in the next school year.
Thank you.
Yes. Any other questions? Mrs. Nyman?
Yeah, you said Earl was down. Is our overall percentage down, or it's just a freak thing that Earl went down this year?
Earl went down this year, and, in speaking with Mrs. Franco about that, there could potentially be a couple reasons for that. One thing is the state has continued to provide free breakfast for all students. That has continued since the pandemic. And so that sense of urgency for families to fill out that free and reduced lunch application might not be there quite as much at the beginning of the year because their kids are getting breakfast. There's also the application is due in October of each year. You're kind of grandfathered in the first month or so of school. And so sometimes families forget about it until all of a sudden October comes and all of a sudden they're finding out that they owe some lunch money because they didn't reapply. And then, they scramble to do that. But there's a certain date that we have to capture what % of free and reduced lunch numbers we have. And so if they apply late after that date where we have to capture the number, they're not included in the count. So I know Mrs. Franco was making sure at back to school night and so on that families were being reminded and had access to how to get that application.
And that, Mrs. Nyman, has been an ongoing concern as a building principal to make sure we advocate for families to fill out that form because it's important on so many levels.
Has the overall number then changed? For the whole district?
We have seen some increases. When we look back a couple years, we've seen some of our buildings continuing to climb. And some of it has shifted as, we had the right sizing a few years ago as well, which kind of impacted the distributions at some of our buildings. But overall, our buildings with the higher numbers, Colebrookdale and West and Washington Elementary, we've seen some pretty significant increases there.
Yeah, when I started 14 years ago, we were in the mid-20s, and now it's at 51% at Colebrookdale. So it's more than doubled in 14 years.
Yes. Any other questions? All right, thank you so much.
BCIU report, Mr. Brophy.
Although we've been working extensively with the BCIU for the last several weeks, I have nothing for this meeting.
Okay. BCTC report, Mr. Updegrove.
We got a meeting a couple weeks ago, and it was just basically to get everybody in and get acclimated to the way the school's running. So a lot of the projects are being completed. Our meeting was without air conditioning, so it was very hot in there, but the meeting was short. But I'll have more on the 25th after that meeting for the next following meeting. Thank you.
No one signed up for public comment period number 1, so at this time we'll be looking for the approval of the August 27th, 2024 Board of School Directors meeting minutes.
Zawada moves.
I'll second.
Mr. Roger Updegrove,
Yes.
Mr. Zawada,
Yes.
Mr. Brophy,
Yes.
Ms. Diroff,
Yes.
Mrs. Kratz,
Yes.
Ms. Nyman,
Yes.
Mrs. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Brad Updegrove,
Yes.
Mr. Panarello.
Yes.
Motion carries.
At this time, I'd like to present the superintendent's consent agenda, and currently on the superintendent's consent agenda, we have 4 settlement agreements. We also have our annual bid awards for spring 2025 athletic department, and this is a little bit of a surprise and a positive scenario. We typically don't get money back, but there was a change order that allowed us the opportunity to get a little over $26,000 back, and that is part of the consent agenda. So we're looking for an approval of the consent agenda.
Mr. Roger Updegrove,
Yes.
Mr. Zawada,
Yes.
Mr. Brophy,
Yes.
Ms. Deeroff,
Yes.
Mrs. Kratz,
Yes.
Ms. Nyman,
Yes.
Mrs. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Brad Updegrove,
Yes.
Mr. Panarello.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Next, I'd like to present the superintendent's itemized agenda, and currently there is only one item on the superintendent's agenda, and that is the personnel list, and we're looking for the Board of School Directors to approve the personnel agenda item as presented. Looking for a motion to approve.
Panarello moves.
Swatter seconds.
Comments or questions?
Mr. Roger Updegrove,
Yes.
Mr. Zawada,
Yes.
Mr. Brophy,
Yes.
Ms. Deeroff,
Yes.
Mrs. Kratz,
Yes.
Ms. Nyman,
Yes.
Mrs. Scott,
Yes.
Mr. Brad Updegrove,
Yes.
Mr. Panarello.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Public comment period number 2, Donnie Savage.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. Donnie Savage. I'm here to say we must keep advocating for state support of public education. Not all of our legislators are with us. So in a nutshell, what happened is in the past 2 years, what happened over the past 2 years is that our PA state share of public education funding ranks 47th in the United States, and this was declared unconstitutional by the courts. As a result, the Basic Education Fund Commission was established, and they proposed a 7-year investment in public education to fix this. Then House Bill 2370 was created to codify that plan, guaranteeing the year-over-year investment so that the situation would be resolved in 7 years, and additionally placing an $8,000 cap on the cyber charter regular ed tuition. The House Bill 2370 passed the House, but our representatives Shoren, Gillen, and Maloney did not vote for it. House Bill 2370 was then never picked up in the Senate. So our school district, as you know, budgeted counting on all of that money, and still we were using $1.275 million of our fund balance and a 3% tax increase just to balance the budget for the status quo of recurring cost of business. But the board did not advocate for it, and one board member even spoke against it based on misinformation. So then the state passed the budget 11 days after their June deadline, and the overall outcome was that 11% of the funding gap across the state was covered instead of 14% that would have taken 7 years, that would have been needed for a 7-year fix. They did not place an $8,000 cap on cyber charters, but instead the state is helping school districts with additional, and may I say, taxpayer funds, and there's no guarantee on the year-to-year increase. The outcome for Boyertown is that we actually made out better than House Bill 2370 in some areas, but we were a big loser with the cyber charter costs. Overall, all those pieces put together, we're getting more than $500,000 less than we budgeted for, if my calculations are correct. And our representatives, Gillen and Maloney and Senator Pennychuck, voted against even that. So please have a finance discussion to discuss where this extra $500,000 will come from. I assume that will be the fund balance. And so what are our long-term implications of this? And please advocate for public education with our state legislators. Thank you very much for your time.
Joe Piccioni?
Okay, now we're on. Hi, I'm here today to ask the board, the district, and the community as a whole to examine what the purpose of school sports, particularly at the middle school, is supposed to be and what they're supposed to accomplish. For some background, my son, sitting in the back there, is a 7th grader at Middle School East. He was very excited to join the boys soccer team there, and before school started, we received an email from the coach with logistical information, and in it he mentioned making cuts after the first 5 days of practice, which left me wondering why a middle school soccer team would be making cuts at all. When he came home on that first day, I asked how many boys were there. He said 21 7th graders and 15 or 16 8th graders, and that there would be a separate 7th and 8th grade team. He said the coach had mentioned cuts again, but I had thought that those numbers should make talks of cuts mute. Just a few days before, I spoke to parents whose children play soccer at the high school. They said that they were taking about 40 players total for the varsity and JV teams for both boys and girls. So surely there would be ample room for everyone at a middle school when they didn't even have that many. This was confirmed when I looked at the Boyertown Athletics website. They list 24 varsity players and 18 JV players. One player is listed on both lists for a total of 41 boys and 23 varsity and 16 JV players listed for a total of 39 girls. But here we are, last week being told that our son and others had been cut from the team. When I expressed my confusion and concern to the coach, he defended his decision with platitudes about balancing playing time, but agreed that middle school sports are supposed to be an inclusive, welcoming environment to learn teamwork. Yet his actions say some boys are actually not welcome on the team anymore. When we contacted the athletic director, he dismissed our concerns, said cuts are necessary because Boyertown is a large district, and then followed that with a litany of other issues, many of which are real, including the budget, which was mentioned before, and not having enough money. But they don't seem to explain why 21 is too many soccer players for a middle school team. Last night, I actually dug through some boxes. I played middle school soccer myself in 7th grade. There were 27 boys on the team, or at least 27 boys in the picture. There might have been more who weren't there on picture day. And that was at a time when things like inclusivity were non-existent. Additionally, there were more than 40 girls on the middle school team at my middle school. There wasn't a separate 7th and 8th grade team for girls at the time. So I don't really accept that there was a need to cut anyone here given the circumstances. I cannot understand why the priorities at our middle school wouldn't be to accept as many participants as possible if they want to be there. But it's not just my own playing experience I'm drawing on and asking this question. I know it's possible because I coached track at Middle School West for 5 years. Each year we had kids come out who were not top-notch athletes, yet we never told any of them to go home because they weren't good enough. I'm not here to argue my son back on the team or demand the coach be removed or reprimanded. He was empowered, wrongly in my opinion, to make cuts, and he did. And frankly, I don't want my son playing for a coach who only saw kids' value to a middle school team as their on-field prowess and who don't have the creativity and care for kids to find a way to make 21 players work when I experienced it working with nearly 30. I'm simply here to emphasize that if we only make room for kids who are already good at sports by the time they're in 7th grade, we're not just sending the wrong message to kids who got cut. We're actually sending the wrong message to the ones who did make the cut too.
Board comment. Mr. Updegrove?
No comment.
Ms. Nyman?
Yes, on Sunday, what is our rules for keeping the gates open down here at the Monroe Street extension?
On Sunday? Can you give me an example? Were the gates open or were they closed?
They were open
Okay,
all day long.
okay.
I went past at a little after 9 o'clock in the morning, and then I went past again, I think it was about 10 after 8, and they were still wide open.
Yeah, they are on a program, so I would have to look into what had taken place.
I mean, everybody was going in and out.
Yeah, it's my belief that they are not to be open, and I can't speak as to why they were open, and I can inquire.
I thought our policy was that they were supposed to be closed, but that's why I'm checking.
It was Sunday. Sunday.
It was just, I don't know about Saturday, I didn't go past Saturday, I just went past Sunday. So I don't know when it opened, and I assume it was still open Monday morning when school started.
They are open before school and after school for the bus traffic flow, but I
That I
will look
know.
into those other odd hours.
But I think after the buses are out, I think somewhere around 4 o'clock, I think they close.
I agree. I think it is about 4 o'clock. Yeah, like I said, they're on a program, and I know just by going to athletic events after school, they typically are closed during the day, but the weekend, I don't know, there could have been something in the system that they were open, but I'll look into it.
I saw no sporting events on any
Yeah.
of the fields.
Yep.
No cars anywhere, no nothing. Just the gates wide open, both in and out. I also would like to discuss how minutes are being kept. When we have Mr. Sultanic giving a legal opinion, nothing is being put in the minutes. And I think a legal opinion, regardless of what it's about, should be kept in our minutes.
Is that required to be put in minutes or not?
There are no rules that determine what need to be placed in the minutes other than the actual actions taken by the board. It's really up to you as a board to decide on a regular basis what gets included in the minutes and what doesn't get included in the minutes. And if it doesn't get included in the minutes, then it's not part of the official record of the meeting. The only official record of the meeting is the minutes.
And my question is, why, when we have a legal opinion coming from our solicitor, should that not be included in our minutes?
You should ask that of your fellow board members.
I'm
who-
asking.
Okay, who vote on the minutes on a regular basis.
I'm asking because that should be part of our minutes. Nobody should have to go back and review a video to find anything. Any legal, I'm not saying what I'm saying should be part of it, but if you have somebody requesting Mr. Sultanic to give us a legal opinion on something, that should be part of our minutes for everybody to see. So I guess I'm going to make a motion that that become part of our records from here on in.
You can't make a motion this evening. You cannot make a motion. It's
Then
not
I
on
am
the
asking
agenda.
that that gets put on for the next meeting.
I'll take it into consideration. Ms. Kratz?
Whether you have that as a separate motion or not, you will have on your next meeting minutes. So that's where the issue will be addressed, whether you have a broad-based motion on that or not.
Trust me, I'm working on it.
So tomorrow, Boyertown School District will remember, and it's called A Day to Remember, and we can thank the Boyertown School Board in 2018. And Ruth, I think you were one on the board that went for this day and set up a resolution called A Day to Remember in memory of all the children, the women, the men who lost their lives on September 11th, 2001. And I appreciate that. I think that was a great thing to do, and I'm very honored to be part of this district for that reason.
Ms. Deeroff?
I was going through some of the bill lists, and since when did we start hiring a service to do our weeds? We always used to do those before. When did we change that? Excuse me?
Can you pull your mic down? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I said, I was going through some of the bill list and seeing where we were paying a company to come in and do weed control. We always did that ourselves before, and that can get costly. This one, I don't know how often we do it, but I caught one bill for $2,900. Like someone mentioned earlier, we're short money all the time. That's one area where we did the work ourselves before. I don't know why that changed. I'd like to know. And I seen in the paper, and I apologize, I should have wrote down the name of the grant, but a big, large grant for quite a few $1 million was just given to Antietam, and I think 2 other Berks County schools. believe Reading was one, and I can't remember the other one. Did we apply for any of that money, like for our roofs or anything? Did we apply for that grant?
Not that I'm aware of.
Because there was quite a few $1 million, over $100 and some million that the state was giving out. And that's a real shame if we didn't try to get any of that, because we sure could use it for our roofs. Thank you.
Ms. Deeroff, we did apply for another grant, that opportunity for the public school facility improvement grant. We expect probably over the next 30 days from what was shared at the IU level that we should be hearing from the state whether or not those were approved, and they were for roofing projects of the district.
Okay, I think Antietam got quite a bit of money to build their whole new school from the state.
I believe you are correct, and I don't know how much of that was rooted in the environmental concerns that they might have found there.
Because we have some environmental concerns also. Thank you.
I did notice in the checks being distributed, we sent a check to DUI for setting up meetings and things for turf. What contract was that set under?
I had stated in our email communication earlier this week that there were 2 points in time in February 27th specifically, and also on May 14th that we had approved Dewey Engineering to perform the. I'm going to just call it, and I'm not an expert in the piece of it, but the evaluation of.
Let me hold you for a second. We had a
Okay.
meeting in the June, did you look at the June 11th meeting? In the June 11th meeting, Mrs. Deeroff brought up a lot of concerns about that contract, and it was said at that time, and that's, I think, what Mrs. Nyman is referring to, it was said at that time that it would be reviewed and checked out and then brought back for final approval again after the June 11th meeting. There was no meeting to do a final approval on that again. I specifically asked at that time, are we in a contract on the hook for $277,000 to DUI in a contract? And I was told no, not until it was approved by solicitors and came back to us for another vote. So once again, I'm going to ask, how did we pay that if we never brought it back to the board and approved it?
I recollect that differently. Almost everything you said sounds exactly the way I recollect it, except that, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the solicitor said at that time that we were not on the hook until after they reviewed it and hashed it out.
And brought
Not
it
that
back.
it had to come back and be re-voted on. We already voted on it.
Look at it again. It said, and brought back to the board.
That's how I understood it.
Well,
Look at the video.
look at the video. I just looked at it.
All right.
It was brought back to, it would be brought back to the board, so we would do a double verification. I'm not sure exactly what words were used.
And when it was brought back to the board, was that for us to view it, or was that for us to vote on it
That
again?
was for us to approve it.
That's what it said in the thing?
That's what was said at the end of the meeting. That's what the words were at the end of the meeting. So we did not do that. So I'm trying to understand, was the words in error at the June 11th meeting, or were we in error of putting out a contract that wasn't approved and sending out a check?
It is my understanding that the board motion was to approve the Dewey contract subject to solicitor and administration approval. I do not believe that the actual motion itself said otherwise. I don't have the minutes before me.
I have it right here, Mr. Sultanic. It said that on May 14th, the Board of School Directors approved Dewey Engineering Incorporated as the engineering/consulting firm to represent the district's interest in the proposed artificial turf project, not to exceed $277,000, and subject to the solicitor and administration approval on the final wording.
Okay, and from my understanding, my firm gave approval to the contract language on July 23rd, and it was followed by the internal administration's approval of that contract to move forward. As to what may have been said separate and apart from that action, I don't have a specific recollection, and if indeed that was stated, I don't believe it was brought back for further action to the board. but the motion itself, which the board has approved those minutes, which is the binding action, has authorized that.
And this is exactly why what Mrs. Nyman is asking for can't be taken under consideration. It has to be moved on and brought forward for the board to talk about how we're going to capture things throughout the meeting, especially and when they're legal in nature. So that would avoid this situation.
Until this was brought up just now,
Yeah.
I was unaware of it.
That's correct. We just reviewed it because the check just went out this week. First time I saw a check that said Dewey for turf fields. So that's why it's being brought up at this meeting.
Okay.
So,
Now, did the board just vote to approve that check?
Was that on the thing?
I don't,
Is that on the bill listing?
it's on the bill list.
It was.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
so you did vote to approve that check.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So even, I'm just saying,
Yeah.
as a matter,
Yeah.
there's two issues here.
right.
Issue number one is whether or not we're in legal compliance with the contract. So even if we didn't have a contract, if you authorized the payment of the bill, the majority of the board authorized it. So that makes it quote-unquote legal. But the issue is whether or not that agreement should have come back to the board for further action based upon what was verbally represented at the meeting. That's what I'm gathering
Yes.
is the nature of your comment.
Yes.
From a pure legal perspective, we're fine. And I do believe that the board has voted on, and we currently have a binding contract with Dewey. And even if we didn't have a binding contract with Dewey, you authorized the payment of the check. So I'm just saying, on many different levels, we're legally covered. I think you're making a practical, non-legal argument as to how we would view these things in the future, or do these things in the future.
Well, the contract that was put before us, I totally ripped that contract apart at the next meeting after they voted on it. Because I didn't see the RFPs before it was put out, which, okay, it might have been my fault, it was on the website, but, I brought that up, I mean.
I think what happened, Mrs. Deeroff, you commented on the RFP document, which was before the vote on the contract. The contract itself was not reviewed by my office and finalized until July 23rd, which was, remember that action was subject to solicitor and administration approval. So it was on July 23rd that our firm gave approval of it, and I will submit to you that the contract language issues you had raised, including, but not limited to, I'm just, because I recall it very vividly, that, you refer to the fact that we're a Berks County School District, and the RFP made mention of a different county, but in the contract itself, it is correct that was ultimately approved. But as to what the board saw in terms of updates and the like, I can't speak to what was shared with the board or not shared with the board, because that's typically done by the administration.
I think the answer to that is nothing.
Yeah, I didn't see any.
It was never brought
July
back.
23rd.
Was never, part of what was said on the June 11th meeting was, yes, we've approved the RFP, but the contract still has to be through approval and review by the solicitor to come back to the board for final approval. Now, that may have been, I may have misunderstood that, which is, okay, that's on me. However, that's why it's now, I believe, what Mrs. Nyman has stated, that any type of legal verbiage at all needs to be captured in the meeting minutes and not pushed apart as to, that's just board comments, we don't need to capture that. And I think there's been a lot of confusion on that, and we don't capture board comments in any of I went back through all of we don't ever capture board comments in our meetings, so things that are said on board comments, may be of consequence and will not be part of the legal record. I don't think that's the right way we should be proceeding.
Well, I will also submit to you, there's a lot of material written on the subject of what should be included in minutes or not. Sometimes people make improvident remarks at meetings and the like, and you don't want to capture that also in the minutes also. That's why we have a regular minutes review. Minutes should not be a transcript of the proceeding, and in fact, I recall probably before your tenure as a board member, the board actually debated that issue here. And I wrote a legal opinion on that particular issue as to whether or not minutes should actually be a transcript of the proceeding or not. And I had issued an opinion that it should not. And the board did discuss that and decided to move forward on that basis. There was a period of time where I recall for a few years where the board was voting down the minutes. We couldn't get past that first part of the agenda very quickly. So, I understand the questions and the import of this, but I'm not so sure that a one-size-fits-all response is appropriate to that. I think you need to look at the minutes and the like. But legally, the contract, in my opinion, with Dewey has been officially approved by the board. That is a non-issue. As to what was stated and represented following that action has not been recorded as the minutes. I understand that there may be a video recording of it, but the video recording is not binding.
I have a question in reference to that. So let's say Mr. Brophy, his recollection is 100% correct.
Okay.
And let's say that per Nyman, that was recorded in the minutes. Would your legal opinion at that point, or what you had said at the end, would that have superseded the motion?
No.
So it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant.
Well, it does matter. This is why Mrs. Nyman's request should come into a board meeting and be discussed on what should go into the minutes, especially if there's a legal statement issued. I'm not saying that everything that goes on in the board comments goes in there, because that would probably end up with a book at the end of each meeting, and that's not practical. However, if something is stated on like a contract or legal issue, or could be legal in nature, that should be caught. And that should be captured in the minutes so that it does become part of our record. And we don't have what we're having right now, which I think is not what we should be doing.
But I think the point that Mr. Panorello is asserting, let's assume for a moment that would have been transcribed as part and approved as part of the minutes. It still doesn't overturn the board action which was taken in question. I think that's the point that Tony's making, that the mere fact that there was some discussion afterwards that was memorialized. The key actions that you take as a board are the actual motions and the wording on those motions as recorded. I understand, as a matter of transparency and disclosure to the board, you obviously, Ms. Nyman obviously, I think Mrs. Dieroff left the meeting with the impression that you were going to see that contract again before it was going to be implemented. I understand that the confusion that may have resulted from that. But in terms of the quote-unquote action which was taken, the action was the motion, and the motion was acted upon in accordance with the board vote. So I understand the issue, but I'm not sure that it would be cured by the motion that would be suggested. I think that's what the issue would be.
And that's why I'm saying it has to come before the board for a discussion on how we're going to handle that in the future. And I think to get rid of confusion and increased transparency on what we're doing. If that had been captured in the meeting minutes, instead of not being captured, we may have avoided this whole confusion, and it would have come back like I believed it should have after the corrections were made, and we could have then discussed it at that time. So we skipped the opportunity to review a contract and make sure it was correct and everything was the way it should be by not capturing this.
I would suggest then, if that's the position of the board, unless we are faced with an emergent issue, we should not approve contracts subject to solicitor or administration approval, and that would avoid even any of the interpretation issues in the future. So you see the contract when you vote on it. That might affect the timing of certain contracts, which might be problematic, but that's a simpler method to address the issue.
I agree, and I think that's why it should come back to the board for a board discussion as a board topic at a board meeting.
But I don't think it gets cured. I think my point
Yeah.
is, I don't think it gets cured by the motion being part of the minutes.
No.
It gets cured by the condition of the motion itself, that if you want to see the contract, then you should not vote for subject to solicitor or administration approval, because you're delegating that authority to two individuals before the action is going through.
And I agree with that. However, there are timing issues that may be more than that. So therefore, that's why I'm saying it needs to come back before the board to determine which is the better option or better method to follow through with it. And I just think it has to be it has to be on an agenda item, has to come here for discussion, and has to be, especially with you here, Mr. Sultanic, to look at all those issues, and also with you, Mr. Mike
Stout.
Stout.
So, Mr. Brophy, let me.
So I'm
let me-
looking for both.
let me see-
We need
let
to-
me- Mm-hmm.
Well, let me finish. We need to hear from the administration's angle as to how that would affect you. And we need to hear from Mr. Sultanic as far as legally how that affects us. And that way we go forward with a thought-out plan on how we're gonna handle this and not kick it down the road.
Put on the agenda.
So let me just go back in time. So let's go back to May 14th, and I'm just going to, if we could go back to that meeting. And the motion that would have been notified in advance was just like I read before, and the specific end of that says, and subject to the solicitor and administration approval on this final wording. We know this topic has brought up a lot of discussion, so I'm saying that with, in a kind way. So at that particular time, could it have been that the wording of that motion at that time, knowing that the topic was going to be what it was, that you wanted to make sure that that motion never should have reached the agenda at that time, knowing the topic? Or is it something that if we know it's a time-sensitive situation and it might not have quite as much meat to the situation, that we would say that, we are in agreement that to have it on as a motion for with that wording?
That would be the topic of the board issue for a board meeting, to go over just that and look at that from all aspects. That's why I'm saying I don't want to make that decision right now.
My suggestion is, because you can't really bind a future board on that kind of motion anyway, that when that issue comes up on the agenda, I would suggest that the board question that, ask the administration, why are you requesting those conditions? What's the timeline? And you debate that as a board. I think that's the most efficient, to view this on a case-by-case basis. A one-size-fits-all response, I don't think, will work, because, for example, I'll use an example, a grant. Okay, if as the result of that or a grant agreement, or something that impacts timing of something that we don't have a board meeting in between, that we have to get it done, the administration will explain that to the board, and the board will make a decision, either yes or no. So, to me, that is the most efficient way to handle it than having a broad-based discussion in advance where it may not be a one-size-fits-all solution. I hear you.
Agreed, but some procedural portion needs to be put in of how we're going to do it, what's going to be done. In other words, how are we going to proceed? Now, that's where the discussion comes out, based on exactly what you just said. What needs to be part of that? How do we move forward on that, and what do we need to proceduralize, if anything?
I don't think you need to, I don't think you need to establish a procedure. All I'm saying is that when you see that on the agenda, you raise your question and says, I'm not prepared to agree to it in that form. I'd like to see the contract. It's that simple.
Based on the time I've been here, if we walk away from this right now, from this one, that won't happen. I'm telling you, that won't happen. It'll be forgotten, we'll move forward, and we'll just continue to do what we're doing. And I don't think that's the right answer. I understand what you're saying, and I
Okay.
understand where you're going.
But I'm not sure you can, I'm not so sure that you can legally establish a procedure like this in advance.
And that's okay, let's put it at a board meeting and discuss it.
Okay.
That's all I'm asking for, I'm not asking for any more than that.
So now just so I understand, you're asking for two things. One, to add to the meeting minutes, anything that the Sultanic adds.
I'm
No.
asking for a discussion
Oh,
on
just
all that.
discussion?
Just an agenda item to discuss how we're going to handle issues like this. What do we do moving forward? Do we stop approving stuff until we get the review? That might not be the right answer. So I don't want to go, I don't want to go there.
You may want to talk about adopting a policy to address this issue, that about the administration making recommendations to approve contracts subject to solicitors and administration approval. You could talk about a procedure and have some exceptions built into it. That probably is the best way to possibly address that issue, and you address it through board policy, so that it would guide the administration and the board leadership in the future as to how agendas are framed.
Yes. One word.
Okay, somebody has been having a hand up for a very long time.
Sorry about that. It also goes back to the May 28th meeting where you made a recommendation also, a legal thing, because Mrs. Deroff had brought all those questions about the RFP that was going out. And rightfully so. There were a lot of questions there, a lot of concerns. And you made the recommendation there that it should be looked at and it should be brought back to the board for us to look at again, just so we understood it. Not saying that it couldn't go, but to make sure those corrections were there. So we knew exactly what was going out. So it's the May 28th meeting, and it's also the June 11th meeting.
I was riding horses on June 28th.
May 28th.
I was riding horses on May 28th. Couldn't tell you.
May 28th, yes, it was in there too. Because that's the day Mrs. Deroff brought out all of the things.
So can we get that put on as an agenda item in an upcoming, a fairly soon upcoming meeting?
Yeah, like I said, I'd take it into consideration.
No,
That's my answer. It's like that. I'm gonna talk to Sultanic, get his opinion on stuff, and then I'm gonna take it into consideration.
So you're not gonna schedule one at some time?
I mean, I didn't stutter. I said it straight up.
Yeah,
I'm gonna take it into consideration.
What about
It'll
the
be on the
rest of
agenda.
us? When we want something, your board leadership, we're asking you for it, and you look at us.
And I said I'll take it into consideration. Because it might not be on the next meeting, because I don't know what that agenda looks like yet. It might not be on the one after that.
That has nothing to do with your answer. I'll take it into consideration.
Well, what else if I just say yeah, and then we do it at the end of December? That's not gonna make anyone happy.
Yes, I'll put it on as an agenda item in the near future.
I want to be accurate. That's why I said I'll take it into
In
consideration.
consideration is not an answer.
All right. Mr. Updegrove?
So in other words, I have no answer. You're staying with the in consideration answer?
Yes.
So we have no movement forward on this, and it's gonna sit and die.
That's how it's gonna happen.
So it's gonna sit and die. Okay.
Okay. If that's how you interpret it, then,
That's how I interpret it.
okay.
So I will ask that it doesn't sit and die. I think there's some conversation that could be had here for sure. I think it would help some of the confusion, because there absolutely was confusion with that last issue, as you could see everyone recalling this and that and everything else. I don't know if it would always help, but again, it would be on a case-by-case basis, but certainly some sort of procedure would be great. On a better note, Parents' Night at New Hanover was excellent. Parents' Night at junior high east was, middle school east, sorry. I just dated myself a little bit. Teachers are great, I can already tell. Looking forward to the year with my kids. Maybe they aren't, but I am. And then just one quick question too. With middle school sports, is there a cut limit? Was that at the discretion of the coach, or is there actually like, no, because this many kids can fill in the bus, so it's got to be 21? Or is there anything that's set up?
Mr. Palladino can speak to that.
It's really dependent on, first, the sport, number of uniforms we have, number of coaches, and like basketball is different than
Right, for sure.
than soccer, 'cause the number of people on the field. We try to make it so it's with the limited play time that PIAA sets for us, especially down at the middle school level. We try to make it so we can get everybody equal amounts of time during the game. Whether we don't want it to be 1 minute, we want it to be a decent amount. So we always try to come up with a number based upon those figures. Some years we do not have to make any limited or any roster restrictions, depending on how many kids we get out. Some years we have to make them at West, but not at East. But we cannot combine those schools because they're separate entities in PIAA. So
Don't we do that with football?
football, we move everybody over and we only have one schedule.
Okay. Okay. And I'm sorry, I don't know if the numbers were there, but do we know how many kids were cut at East?
I know our final roster is at 32 right now.
Okay. I was just wondering, if it was 5, I'd say what would it matter? It was 5?
There were 37 kids there, so it's 32.
I don't know why you couldn't keep the remaining 5, but, okay. Thank you.
That's the whole idea of intramural, or even JV, is to learn. So I agree with Mr. Updegrove. Why cut? I can understand the understanding about but the kids learn teamwork. They can grow. I mean, you've seen a lot of baseball players that in 8th grade, 9th grade, you thought was going to be the superstar, and by 10th or 11th, their arm was blown out. So, but I think every student at that age, one, mentally, which is important. We have a mental issue, a problem with our schools. And 2, if the coach is already there, the equipment's there, it's 1 ball, 2 nets, I just, again, I can see it at a varsity level. You've had this child under your wing for 3 years. Again, there's more than just playing involved for our students. That's the reason we want sports and band, to give them a rounded education. So cutting kids is not rounding things.
I don't disagree with you, but this has been something we have had to do for years. There's one school in the area who does not make those restrictions. Their middle school soccer team right now, they told us at our league meeting this morning, has close to 100 players on it. How's that fair to anybody? We said, how do you do that with only having 1 8th grade team and 1 7th grade team? They said, well, we throw everybody out in the field, let them run around, and then we take this group to one game, this group to another game, this group to another game, and so the kids maybe get 2 games. We try, when we have to make these restrictions, we try to give kids opportunities to either try another avenue, another sport. We give them opportunities to join, say, a rec or a travel team. It doesn't mean their soccer career is over or their basketball career is over. We give them opportunities to come back out and try to make it again in the future.
Well, there was just 5 kids now singled out. So they may not feel comfortable trying to play again because they don't want that feeling that, I don't want to use inclusiveness, but that's what it is. Again, it's a rounded education. Hey, if this was the varsity team and we're playing for a division or, playoffs and stuff like that, I have no problem. You want to put your best people out there. But during practice and stuff like that, I can't fault that school district that has 100 kids. I mean, they're out there, they're kicking the ball, they're spending time with their friends, they're making friendship, and they're learning a big part of life, because guess what? They're gonna have to learn to get along with each other later in life, in their jobs and with their families and raising their kids. So to set an example and say, hey, you know, I got cut when I was in 8th grade and you don't seem to be doing that well, and you're the father, so I wouldn't tell you to go out. Is that good for the parent to say that to their child? We'll leave it at that. I'm just, you know. I have no further comment.
I have no comment.
Okay. Upcoming meeting dates, we have September 24th, School Board of Directors meeting at 7 p.m. here at the Ed Center. And then on October 8th, we have the Committee of the Whole meeting at 7 p.m. at the Boyertown Area School District Education Center.
Motion to adjourn?
Mine and move.
I'll second.